This phrase is not an ancient Celtic phrase. This phrase is not even an Old Irish phrase, and I'm going to show you why. Recently, one of the language programs that I like and sometimes contribute to claimed that this was an ancient Celtic phrase and that it's somehow rooted in Celtic Christianity. I'm sure some of you have already realized that this phrase is complete nonsense. But then why did an accredited language program and even outlets like The Guardian and the New York Times claim this to be a Celtic phrase?
Oh shoot, she mad now, me hiding.
Giveaway number one that it's not an ancient Celtic phrase is that it mentions heaven. A lot of Celtic mythology instead talks about an other world or another place to go to, but not a place in the sky. The second dead giveaway is that it mentions feet. Celts didn't measure things in feet. As well, any mention of something being ancient Celtic should be taken with a grain of salt. Celts in general were not one people. They were not a race. The word comes from the Greek keltoi and was borrowed by the Romans just to mean foreigner, meaning anybody who was not a Roman. Nowadays we use this term to talk about Celtic languages, but that's about it. So let's take a look at if this is Irish. The concept of a veiled place does exist in Irish folklore, but not a thin place or thin places. The Christian attribution came from Reverend George MacLeod, who was Scottish, and he said something about Iona in 1938. During the founding of Iona, he was the one that said that Iona was one of the thin places, but he never said this in a Celtic or an Irish context. The idea of thin spaces actually is a Roman concept. The word linmen, which you'll know as liminal, meaning threshold. You'll hear a lot of veil thinning phrases, usually around Samhain. So if the earliest use of this phrase is 1938, why does anybody think this is ancient? Because Victorian spiritualists said so.
Ah man, not the Victorians again?
Yep. The earliest use of part of this phrase is written by John Weatherby in 1885. Just to be clear that this whole phrase is a modern made-up construction, I phoned a friend to Professor Ronald Hutton. Always good to double-check to make sure I didn't miss anything. According to Professor Ronald Hutton, this phrase in its entirety never existed before the mid-20th century. So even if it was partly invented by a Scotsman, it's not ancient and it's certainly not Irish. So what did we learn here, kids? That even if the New York Times and the Guardian and other reliable sources say so, always make sure to ask your local linguist. If anybody tells you that such and such is an ancient Celtic something, ask them, well, which Celts?
This message is brought to you by your local etymology society.